Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. The election was just called on Wednesday, but already campaigning is well underway. Why did Rishi Sunak opt for a snap July poll? And how's his campaign going? We'll get the latest from London. The TUV will be hoping its partnership with Reform UK could have a big impact here. We'll talk to the party leader, Jim Allister. And John Manley from the Irish News is here to look ahead to a very busy 6 weeks in politics. Rishi Sunak surprised pretty much everyone when he plumped for July the 4th as the date for the general election. The Prime Minister spent a few hours here on Friday, and this morning we have his first big commitment, a plan to bring back mandatory national service if the Tories win the election. Let's hear from Lucy Fisher from the Financial Times. Lucy, we'll come on to that first election pledge in a moment, but why July? Because all the indications seem to be that he'd wait.
Well, that's right. But this week we had the inflation data on Wednesday, which was not quite as good as expected. And that prompted jitters that the interest rate cuts that are expected this summer might not come as soon as hoped. And therefore, people might not be feeling the benefit of it by the time of October, November. Even more crucially, I think, as far as I'm told, that the Prime Minister and Chancellor also realised that with growth forecasts and measuring up the fiscal headroom, that essentially there wouldn't be room to do more tax cuts in a fiscal event in the autumn. So the reasons for waiting had very much shrunk. And on the other hand, the reasons for going now, the inflation data getting almost back to normal seemed like a good moment. Data earlier this month showing that the UK has come out of a technical recession and is now growing again. And of course, the hope that the Rwanda flights will get off the ground by early July, with the flagship policy having finally passed into law, felt like enough of a moment around which to coalesce and try and launch the general election campaign.
It does look like it's been a faltering start to the Tories' campaign. When you look at some of the incidents that he's got himself caught up in, I mean, he got soaked in Downing Street as he made that announcement with Labour's 97 campaign song blaring out in the background. He talked to people in Wales about the Euros. Wales didn't qualify for the Euros. He came to Belfast, visited the Titanic Quarter, and then he was in the West Midlands, pictured building a red wall. I mean, maybe it's just as well he took yesterday off.
Well, I think you're right. It has been a really floundering start to this campaign from him. I think it just really highlights how much he's on the back foot. If the polls are to believe, they have him 20 points behind Labour. And I think the shock, dramatic way in which he's called the snap election has really taken a lot of his party, including some cabinet allies, by surprise. And it really is a mixed picture, the reaction from his own MPs. So I think it's sort of, at the end of week one, it's not feeling like the campaign is in a very healthy position. Whereas Keir Starmer, even though he had the election sprung on him, he somehow looked more prepared right from that first televised message with him sort of standing behind a wood-back panel, flanked by union flags, compared with, as you mentioned, Rishi Sunak looking something like a drowned rat in that downpour outside Downing Street. It's felt that Labour is looking more kind of assured and confident at this stage. But of course, it's early. We've got 6 weeks or so to go.
Yeah, and what about this first big policy pledge of the campaign to bring back national service? That's divided opinion, and Patrick Maguire from The Times is reporting that the Royal Commission that will design the new system will examine particular sensitivities in Northern Ireland, of course, where it'll be a very particular issue.
Well, quite. And listen, it's obviously very eye-catching. It is divisive. And in that sense, I'm not surprised the Conservatives picked this as their first big announcement, because one of their concerns is that the public have just tuned out from the Tories since Liz Truss's disastrous mini-budget of 2022. So they want something to get people noticing them once again, even if it's not for positive reasons. I've certainly been struck, I cover politics, but I was previously the defence editor at the Times. And, overnight WhatsApping many, current and former senior military personnel and sort of, ordinary soldiers that I used to speak to a lot, the reaction has been pretty negative from their community. They think that, the forces do not have the resources, the equipment, even the accommodation to sort of accommodate this kind of scheme. And the defense minister for people in the armed forces, who I interviewed last summer, when I asked him about the idea of national military service that's mandatory, or even expanding a voluntary scheme like the current gap year commission that exists, he was very much against it, saying the problem is you spend all this time training up, managing, organizing these people for a year, and then they leave. All that sort of resource you've invested into them is essentially lost. So I think in coming days we're going to hear quite a lot of backlash from the military community against this too.
Okay, interesting conversation ahead. Lucy, good to talk to you as ever. Thanks very much indeed for joining us today. Let's turn to the local campaign now. On Thursday's View, we heard from the 5 biggest parties here, and if you missed that, you can, of course, catch up with the debate on the BBC iPlayer. Today, we're going to hear from the leader of the TUV, Jim Allister, and I'm pleased to say Mr. Allister joins me now. Welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Allister. We spoke a few weeks ago when it seemed likely that the election would happen in the autumn, and at that stage, you weren't giving anything away about whether you'd be standing yourself as a candidate. Given that the clock is now well and truly ticking, have you made a decision on that yet?
Well, all sorts of decisions are in the process of being made, and before this week is out, you will know all the TUV reform candidates across Northern Ireland, so you won't have very long to wait.
Yeah, we always like an exclusive on Sunday Politics. You are clearly your party's single biggest asset. How would it make sense for you not to run, given that's the case?
Well, you're not going to trap me into answering the question whether I am or not. You'll just have to wait and see. I think it's important that TUV as a team is presented, and that is part of it. And, these are very significant elections, because here we are electing a parliament which, amazingly, its writ doesn't run in part of the United Kingdom. We've seen that with 2 High Court rulings. This Parliament can pass legislation, say it applies to Northern Ireland, like on the legacy, like on migrants, and then the High Court, because of the overriding position of the protocol, can strike it down. So we're electing a Parliament, and this brings to the very forefront the key constitutional issue that I am focused on, that under the protocol we have been detached from the United Kingdom, and now we have a situation where Parliament can't even legislate for the United Kingdom because we're subject in 300 areas of law to foreign jurisdiction. It's a foreign Parliament, not the Parliament in London or in Stormont, that can legislate for much of Northern Ireland.
I'm sure that's a point that you will want to make time and again during the election campaign. Your party and Reform UK announced an alliance at your recent annual conference, and the plan originally, as I understand it, was that you'd run a candidate in each and every constituency. Now, that plan's in the bin already, of course, because Reform hasn't managed to get itself registered in time to deliver on that promise. Can you just be clear for us? Do you know at this stage how your candidates are going to be branded in this election?
Well, by virtue of the speed with which the election came upon, you're correct that Reform didn't have its formal registration in Northern Ireland completed, and therefore the branding will still be TUV Reform UK. We will still have the full backing of a national and growing party, and our candidates, I trust, will appear on the ballot paper as TUV Reform UK, and that will be the presentation and the opportunity for people across Northern Ireland to not just vote for candidates which are locally based, but candidates with a linkage, importantly, right across the United Kingdom. Because I think one of the failings of unionism has been to be far too parochial. And I think, we are part of the United Kingdom. We want to be part of that nation. We want to have a say about its defence. We want to have a say about its economy. We want to be involved in national politics. So I think we need to push aside the parochialism that has entrapped unionism for far too long. And the Reform link-up is an opportunity with a growing party in the UK to do that.
OK, DUP representatives, including, of course, the party leader Gavin Robinson, say they've been engaged in conversations with other unionist leaders about the potential for cooperation on July the 4th. Mr Robinson said on Friday he believes in unionist cooperation and would actively work with others to see if it's possible to maximise unionist representation. How is that conversation between the DUP leader and yourself going at this stage?
Well, first of all, can I correct Mr. Robinson? By Friday, when he said that, there had been no contact whatsoever with TUV, none. And it was on Friday evening that there was contact made about one constituency, which I'm always willing to talk about, because that particular constituency has a tradition of trying to find a combined candidate. So
that's North Down, presumably, is it?
No, North Down, we've already declared our position of support.
So just to be clear about North Down then, you're definitely not running a candidate in North Down, and you're throwing your weight behind the former DUP, now independent unionist candidate Alex Easton, is that right?
As we said on Friday, that we'd had discussions, Mr Habib and I, with Alex Easton, and in consequence of that, we were endorsing and supporting him in North Down, believing it is important that Mr Parry is removed from Parliament, and Mr Easton is the best opportunity to do that.
Right, OK, and we'll see what happens as far as the DUP's position on that is concerned, whether it does or does not want to run a candidate. We know the Ulster Unionists are. The other constituency you're referring to then is Fermanagh South Tyrone, presumably looking for an agreed unionist candidate there to win the seat back from Sinn Féin, whose outgoing MP, Michelle Gildernew, has indicated she's not running again. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's probably no secret. And I think the best idea in that would be a non-party candidate who could embrace the support of all unionists. If that can be achieved, well and good. But, you know, that's the vision and the mission at present. Whether or not it's obtainable, it remains to be seen, because it only takes one of the three parties to say no.
So I just want to be absolutely clear. You're looking for a degree of unionist unity where you think the unionist vote can be maximised. But is it your position as the TUV leader that you will not back any DUP candidate in any constituency? It would have to be an agreed candidate, but not someone representing the DUP. Is that right?
We will not support anyone who can now be classified by virtue of the stand taken by their party as protocol implementers. TV reforms stand as those outside the protocol implementation, and those opposed to protocol that's dismantling our union, that has put a border in the REC, that has subjected us to foreign laws and ruled by a foreign parliament. So yes, it follows. We will not be supporting any candidate that takes a pro-protocol stance.
OK, interesting stuff. Lots to talk about in the weeks ahead. Appreciate your time today, Jim Allister. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. By the way, there will, of course, be a full list of all candidates standing for election on July the 4th, as those details are confirmed on the BBC News NI website. Let's get some analysis of where we are now from the Irish News political correspondent, John Manley. John, a couple of interesting things there from that conversation. It's clear that Jim Allister is not going to run a candidate in North Down. Looks like there's conversation going on about Fermanagh South Tyrone. But it is interesting to hear that clarification that he's not going to support in any constituency a DUP badged unionist.
Yes, it is interesting. You know, that raises the issue around Lagan Valley,
Absolutely.
where Johnny Buckley has been named as the candidate, and Johnny had deep reservations about the Donaldson deal. So I had a bit of difficulty hearing, Jim, exactly what he was saying there. But, you know, in many ways, he's kept his powder dry. So I think it's a case of watch this space. He's teasing us with where the TUV and where he might even stand. He hasn't been clear whether he's going to stand.
Yeah. So, I mean, it does make Lagan Valley very interesting. It also makes East Belfast very interesting, where, according to the latest poll, the party leader, Gavin Robinson, you know, could find it very tight if he's going to hold that seat against the Alliance Party, in particular if the Alliance leader Naomi Long runs. And Jim Allister seems to be prepared to take that risk.
Yes, he does. And as I say, Jim, he won't tell us where he's staying. There is a very strong or an outside possibility that he will choose to stand in East Belfast. His role in this election is not to win a seat. I think he knows that, but is to be a disruptor. And there's nowhere possibly better he could be a greater or more effective disruptor than in East Belfast. But we'll wait and see what happens.
Interesting to hear him talking about needing to push aside parochialism and to stand up for Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom, and that's why he is making much at this stage of his relationship with Reform, even though Reform can't run candidates itself in Northern Ireland. But you would imagine from that it could be that we will see TUV/Reform candidates standing here.
Yes, I believe Reform will be on the ticket mentioned. They are more a silent partner than the partnership that had first been evolved. But I think, Jim, he's just looking to broaden out the TUV. They are a one-issue party in this campaign. He's looking to broaden things out to bring in immigration and stuff.
OK. John, for now, thanks very much. We'll talk to you again a bit later in the programme. Now, the Assembly has been back for nearly 4 months and we've seen a draft budget, though we're still waiting for the final budget, which was due this week but could perhaps be delayed. To discuss the finances of this place, I'm joined by Dr. Lisa Wilson, who's a senior economist with the Nevin Economic Research Institute and who also serves as an advisor on the Department of Finance's Good Jobs programme. Lisa Wilson, thanks for joining us this morning. Are you hoping a budget will be signed off this week, first of all?
Yeah, hopefully we'll go ahead and get the draft budget signed in this week, debated and signed, and hopefully the call of the UK general election won't affect that. I suppose the positive thing in terms of the likelihood of that happening was that it was very positive in the first instance that the executive was able to agree and bring forth a draft budget, given that we knew the difficult and the challenging circumstances that sat behind that. So I'm hopeful that this week, they will go ahead and agree that.
The draft budget was agreed by the executive, but not unanimously so, because we know the health minister voted against it because he didn't think that he was getting enough money. Even though he was getting extra money, hundreds of millions of pounds extra, he believed that it wasn't enough. The Finance Committee has called the budget challenging and raised concerns about the fact that it's a single-year budget and it's not linked to a programme for government. Do you share those concerns?
Yeah, so the context of the budget was very challenging, and we knew that before that. But one of the biggest significant kind of criticisms that can be made of it is that it came without a programme for government attached to it. Without a programme for government, it's difficult to understand whether or not this setting up, this drafting up this budget might say anything more than just divvying up the funds in a way similar to what we've done in the past. And yes, you make reference to the fact that the health minister was outwardly not happy about this, his allocation of funds. And had additional money been supplied to health, though, it would have been at the expense of other departments. Other departments have seen further cuts to their spending in years gone by than that department has had. So we do need to get health spending under control. I think the biggest criticism in relation to that, though, is that the responsibility for transformation seems to be thrown to the Department of Health to undertake this task. And transformation of health is never going to happen if it is at the door of the Department of Health. It is a cross-governmental issue, and the executive needs to be leading from the front for the transformation of health to get that health spending under control.
Can I ask you, do you think, is it actually possible to have a realistic budget in place here without a programme for government?
Without a programme for government, it's difficult to understand how the allocation of funds are being made. It's difficult to understand how strategic goals are being set. It's difficult to understand why decisions are being made and how we, I suppose, evaluate and analyse the success of our government come the end of the budget year, the end of the term. So it's of course they can go forth and they have done. We haven't had a programme for government signed off for more than 8 years. And this place has continued to exist. But it's difficult to see how going forward, how we'll ever get to a place where we have sustainable public finances because to deliver sustainable public finances, we need a plan for sustainable public services, and that is a programme for government.
And that's a very big challenge. We'll wait to see what solutions the politicians come up with in the meantime. Lisa Wilson, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now let's return to the subject of elections, but this time our focus is on the situation in the Republic, where voters are due to go to the polls in the next fortnight to elect new MEPs and local councillors. It's the first big electoral test for the new Taoiseach Simon Harris, and Mary Lou McDonald Sinn Féin will be hoping it proves a stepping stone to entering government buildings after the next general election. We sent Darren Marshall to Dublin to get the latest on the campaigns.
We are right in the middle of the election campaign. There are just 2 weeks till polling day, and it seems 2 big issues are dominating the campaign. Ilian Loughlin, is it all about housing and immigration?
It certainly does seem that way, but things like health are coming up on the doorsteps. In more urban areas, you have transport, access to public transport, but also the condition of roads is also coming up. What's different about this election cycle, I think, is that issue of immigration, and we have seen the tents on the side of the Grand Canal in Dublin. They're still there, they were removed, more came in their place. So it's very much to the forefront of discussion, and I think it's something that's coming up on the doorsteps.
And of course, a name that Northern Ireland viewers will be interested in is the former Agriculture Minister, Michelle Gildernew.
Yes, and I think Michelle Gildernew will be a name that people in Northern Ireland are very well acquainted with. And I think along that border region as well, she is standing in Midlands North West, so she will be well known along the border counties. Sinn Féin, it's interesting this time around because as well as Michelle Gildernew, they're putting forward another candidate in that constituency, but also they're going with that 2-candidate strategy in all 3 constituencies. So I think they would at the very least be hoping for 1 MEP to be elected in each of the 3 constituencies. But I think in some constituencies people are now becoming a little concerned that perhaps while in 2020 in the general elections Sinn Féin didn't put forward enough candidates, perhaps now they have put forward too many candidates at local level.
Kevin Cunningham, you study the polls. What are the polls telling us that voters are concerned about in the run-up to this election?
So the big concern, well, the big change in relation to what voters are concerned about is around immigration. The number of people who would identify immigration as one of their top 2 issues has risen over 40% in recent polling. And that, if you go back 2 years ago, that was 0 to 2%. The other issue which is very important to voters is obviously housing. Housing has been the number 1 issue in Irish politics for the last 5 or 6 years, and it is still the number 1 issue overall.
And how are the polls looking for the bigger parties at the minute?
So the 3 big parties, at the minute they're actually relatively close to one another in the low 20s. If you go back a year and a half ago, Sinn Féin was long ahead of the other parties on the mid-30s, but they've seen a steady decline in the same period in which immigration has become a very, very important issue.
Is there a link between where Sinn Féin's vote started to fall back and where voters started to get concerned about immigration?
Yeah, I think that's fairly clear. The Sinn Féin's vote, at least in the south, seems to be a coalition between working class voters and left-wing voters, and that means that some subset of the Sinn Féin vote is sort of left-wing but middle class, but then another subset might be kind of more right-wing but working class, and it's that subset of the Sinn Féin vote that seems to have dislodged itself from Sinn Féin itself.
You see me?
Small countries do not influence military budgets.
We punch in Article 9, but you're talking about being voluntary.
An agreement means they have to agree rather than they should. So what's your perspective?
Gary Murphy, we're just about a fortnight away from polling day. What's at stake in this election?
Well, I think far more is at stake in this European election than maybe any of the previous 2 or 3, simply because we're so close to a general election, and we're very much in the preparatory stage. All parties are, especially the big parties, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Sinn Féin. A good election could well presage a very good day out at a general election, and a bad election could go the other way.
A lot of talk about the far right making gains at these elections. Are local elections and European elections the perfect place for the far right to make those gains?
Well, I think the far right has a chance of making some breakthrough statistically in terms of the percentage of the vote. But the problem is that there are a number of independent candidates who we might consider to be far right, who I think will dissipate the vote. And I don't expect really any of them to be in contention for seats, particularly at a European level. Of course, Sinn Féin is also in a difficult position because of the symbolism of the border. So the idea of open borders and closed borders becomes very different when we're talking of the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, and in that context I think Sinn Féin has been in a difficult position for the last few weeks as the questions about its immigration policy have probed a little deeper.
Sinn Féin well known for a strong ground campaign in these elections, complicated now by the fact we have an election planned for the UK as well.
It certainly could. I think there was much surprise in the February 2020 general election when Sinn Féin candidates had swarms of canvassers all across the constituencies, and many of those canvassers were bussed down from Northern Ireland, and also just running two elections for a party that covers the whole of Ireland is difficult. Now it's a party not without resources, but those resources could well be stretched thin, and I think Sinn Féin really wants a very good result in the Westminster election.
Darren Marshall reporting there. Let's get a final word with John. This is a big test for the Taoiseach Simon Harris and the Sinn Féin president and the de facto leader of the opposition, Mary Lou McDonald, isn't it?
It certainly is. I think it'll have a great bearing on whether, when the Republic goes to the polls, a good result will encourage Simon Harris to call an election potentially in the autumn, I imagine. Yeah,
because he can wait, of course, until March 2025. When you look at this latest Sunday Business Post poll today, we see that it's pretty good news for Fine Gael, up to at 22%, and it's not great news, not great reading for Sinn Féin.
Yeah. It's a downward trajectory for Sinn Féin over recent months. 23%, not a good look, less than a fortnight out from the election. But, as Darren mentioned in his piece, Sinn Féin, they run a good ground campaign and they'll be throwing all their resources at that campaign in the coming days.
And it's quite a challenge, actually, because the party, of course, which is an all-Ireland party, is fighting different campaigns on different sides of the border. And that's a challenge for any party under any circumstances, but particularly if the polls aren't going your way.
Yeah, all-Ireland party, but no more partitionist when it comes to fighting campaigns. And I think they have to switch the narrative. In the south, it's very much about change and dislodging the status quo. In the north, yes, they'll target the Tories and the need for the change at Westminster. But at the moment, it's about Sinn Féin's narrative is about Stormont stability.
At least Mary Lou McDonald hasn't had a bust-up in public at a press conference launched with one of her candidates. And we saw that with Micheál Martin, the Fianna Fáil leader, and one of his candidates, Niall Blaney. Remarkable stuff.
Micheál Martin, visibly bristling at what Niall Blaney did. I don't know much about Niall Blaney. I'm not entirely surprised by his behaviour. They say about Sinn Féin running potentially too many candidates. 3 could be too many for Fianna Fáil in that situation.
Well, it's interesting stuff. If you haven't seen it, it's worth looking for on social media. John, always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Our politicians have a busy few weeks ahead, and here at the BBC we'll have comprehensive coverage across our TV, radio and digital output. Look out for our Red Lines constituency profiles. Each week for the next 6 weeks we'll be taking an in-depth look at the battles across the constituencies, discussing the candidates, the issues, and maybe even predicting a winner or two. The first of those podcasts will look at the 3 constituencies in the South East, and it will drop on Wednesday afternoon on BBC Sounds. Meantime, the BBC News NI website and app will bring you all the news from the campaign trail every day. And do join me on Thursday night for the start of our series of leaders interviews. That's on The View after the 10 o'clock news on BBC One Northern Ireland and iPlayer. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.